programming will not be seen at this time. Please stay tuned so that we may bring you the following special program.
Fire! Aim! Fire! Aim! Fire!
A final military salute to a veteran of 2 wars, a veteran of more than 40 years here at Channel 5, a pioneer in the field of broadcast meteorology, once the world's greatest weatherman, now heaven's greatest weatherman, Harold Taft.
We are not here tonight to mourn Harold Taft, although each of us does mourn him tonight. We are here to celebrate a life, one that was full and productive. Harold was loved and he was loving. His life touched all of us here at Channel 5, and we have assembled his weather staff and a few friends that you will meet a little bit later. We were all lucky to have known Harold Taft, and for the next hour, we will remember him.
This last day for Harold began at St. Stephen Presbyterian Church in Fort Worth. The magnificent sanctuary was filled with Harold's loyal following, his close friends, and those of us who considered him family. Texas News 5's chief correspondent Mike Snyder begins our tribute tonight with Harold's farewell.
The bells of St. Stephen announced the news across the rolling hillside Harold loved so much, as sunshine befitting the world's greatest weatherman bathed the cathedral with the kindness of those who came to say goodbye to the man they loved, trusted, and considered one of their own.
For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song.
It was song that filled much of Harold's life. He was our weatherman, but he was also a musician, a horn man. Trumpeter's Lullaby, it was Harold's favorite, and so were the hymns played by organist Marilyn Brooks, who accompanied Harold at church and in concert for over a decade. This was her toughest performance, song for Harold's memory that will not pass quickly.
Harold and I had a very special ensemble when we played our music. And not all musicians have that, but we felt it the same way. And it was very special.
And when you play that today without him?
That will be difficult.
We will always remember Harold as a weatherman, a meteorologist, a scientist. But his pastor, Reverend Thomas McCrone, says Harold was a man of God, witnessing that his devout scanning of the skies for weather opened the eyes of the scientist to the wonders of God.
It happened just a few minutes before the 10 o'clock news was to be broadcast. Incredibly, it happened just as Harold said it would. Before putting any forecast on the air, Harold would say, I look up into the sky and talk with the Lord. Just before the 10 o'clock forecast, Harold looked up into the sky and saw his Lord. Jesus kept his word to Harold. It was just as he had promised. By the grace of God, the world's greatest weatherman had become heaven's greatest weatherman. We love you, Harold. We shall miss you.
And we will never forget you, Harold Taft. Mike Snyder, Texas News 5.
At Shannon Rose Hill Cemetery this afternoon, rifle volleys were fired, taps sounded, and tears were shed as Harold Taft was laid to rest. It was a moving military salute to the retired colonel, and as Texas News 5's Brian Mylar shows us, that's the way Harold would have wanted it.
We commend to Almighty God our brother Harold, and we commit his body to its elements, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
On a sunny hillside in Fort Worth, the man many know as a North Texas broadcasting legend was laid to rest. Here, close family, friends, and loyal fans came to say a final goodbye to the chief, the Colonel, Harold Taft.
The Lord bless him and keep him. The Lord make his face shine on him.
Tears were shed and reassurance was given, but the ceremony was much like the man himself, brief, to the point, and shining with military pomp.
He's just a real family guy, and everybody out there at the 136 just has nothing but good, fond memories of him.
Harold was all military, calling Hensley Field a second home, and an honor guard from the 136th Tactical Airlift Wing remembered one of their own.
It's a feeling kind of that a family member has passed on, because the Guard is a family unit.
Even though he's known by millions, I mean, he can meet somebody on the street and make him feel part of his family.
Harold had a particular fondness for buglers, himself playing the cornet. And for the bugler blowing taps today, that made the ceremony extra special.
I found out at 7:30 this morning I was going to play, and I just knew that I had to do it no matter what, and no matter what conflicts I had throughout the day, that I would come out here and take part.
Aim! Fire! Aim! Fire! Aim! Fire! The final shots and the final notes fade away quickly. Not so the memory of Harold Taft in the hearts and minds of many. Brian Mylar, Texas News 5.
It was 18 months ago that Harold learned he had cancer, and as you may remember, he went public with his illness early on. He felt he could help others face the uncertainties of life by publicly confronting them himself. Our Larry Mullins helped Harold with a series of reports.
Are you going to sit there? Yeah. You know how it is when you work with people and you genuinely care about them, but you never really get to know them unless something special or something unusual happens that draws you closer? Well, that something unusual happened to me in June 1990. That's when we got word that Harold had cancer, and the station called on me to put together a series of reports on Harold and the disease. And the funny thing is that it was at the insistence of Harold that we do it. And no, he wasn't out to get ratings or anything. He just wanted to put folks at ease about what he often referred to as the C word. And he wanted to educate people as best he could about what to expect in case you or a loved one wound up with it. So he shared his experiences. I'll never forget what he told me when I asked him, was he scared?
It's not a death sentence, and don't think of it that way.
And that's how he'd deal with it. I mean, nothing could faze him. I don't think he ever worried 1 minute about the disease, which he once snapped was more of a pain somewhere else.
2 minutes.
Because it kept him from doing what he really enjoyed, working.
These are pretty vicious thunderstorms.
Oh, Mr. Taft. How are you?
See, Harold didn't dwell on what could happen. He lived for now.
You had your chemotherapy for the first time about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
How did that go?
I did all right until the weekend.
And as he sat here, chest all bared to the world, he didn't want to keep anything from you. All the while, he was thinking, I've got to get to the studio. I've got to do the weather. And the man had a ton of friends, from the day he came home from the hospital on up until now.
Okay, is that all you got for us?
Harold has gotten close to 100,000 pieces of mail from people who just, well, they just wanted to say, hey, everything's going to be all right. I remember a half-hour special we did called An Open Letter from Harold Taft. And I'll never forget a little boy in Watauga who loved himself some Harold Taft.
I want you to know I say a prayer for you every night.
Meanwhile, back over at the post office, they had to set up a special wing for Harold Taft's mail. One letter went through there with just his name on it. No address, nothing, no zip, but it found him.
I don't smoke, dip, spit, chew, or shoot, you know. And I didn't really worry so much about why me, but why? Just why? What caused this? How did it happen?
Well, nobody knows why cancer happens. It just does. And it took all our dear friend away. And Harold and his darling and very strong wife, Pat, thank you and thank you and thank you. I mean, throughout the series, Harold often reminded me, Larry, make sure you thank everybody. Made me promise.
And there's no question in our mind that this has been one of the great healing effects, and one of the things that helps you get on through is to know that so many people are in support.
One thing about it, he doesn't have to look up at the sky to predict the weather anymore. Harold's up there. And rest assured, every raindrop, every snowflake, every sunbeam has got his name written all over it. Gonna miss him. I'm Larry Mullins.
You know, Harold's weather family reaches far and wide. Weather watchers by the hundreds have called in their reports for decades. Generations of families have been raised on Harold's forecasts. But the closest members of his weather family are David, Scott, and Rebecca. And they tell our Linda Frederick they feel privileged to have worked with the world's greatest weatherman.
This team has been in place for more than a decade. David Finfrock hired in 1976, and then Scott Chesner in 1981. They learned a lot from Harold that went far beyond the weather.
It's not so much what he taught me meteorologically, but personally, to stand up for what you believe in and don't give in to anyone else. He was a man of high integrity, great honesty, a wonderful family man. And those are all attributes that I think we could all aspire to.
But Harold was just doing the job he loved by bringing us the most accurate, up-to-date weather forecast. His accuracy was unparalleled.
See this? Here's one just east of DFW.
He was describing high and potentially dangerous winds, conditions that can make flying hazardous, the situations that caused Delta Flight 191 to go down at DFW Airport in August of 1985.
Chief Meteorologist Harold Taft is here now to tell us about the weather conditions at DFW Airport when that accident occurred. Harold?
This tape and Harold's testimony was used during the federal investigation of the crash. He called it wind shear within hours, and so did investigators more than a year later.
The weather here is serious business, and that's the way Harold always treated it.
Somebody who knows so much more about weather than anybody I've ever known.
And when Rebecca Miller came to Fort Worth for her job interview, she was scared of Harold.
And with Harold wants somebody with the degree, with knowledge, and he wants you to prove it to him. So I was there for my interview. He's asking me equations, mathematical equations, and he's having me do things, take tests and fill and analyze maps and do things I hadn't done in 8 years.
No one's standards were higher than Harold's. He demanded excellence from his weather team, and he was proud of their accomplishments.
It's a standard I insist upon and one you can depend upon.
It's very rare to find standards like Harold has for television, and his standards were that as long as, he would say, as long as I'm here, it's going to be a meteorologist giving the weather and nothing else.
Harold inspired his co-workers with his infectious enthusiasm for his job.
He was addicted to the weather. And he really loved what he did. He always wanted to learn, and he was never bored by the weather. No matter, people would say, oh, the weather's been kind of boring lately, and he'd say, no, never. There's always something interesting about the weather to learn on each and every day.
Despite his total dedication to the weather, Harold is remembered most fondly by his weather family for his humor. His favorite story about Rebecca is focused on this fish. He has a seal from the American Meteorological Society, which Harold had little respect for. Rebecca says Harold hired her after she told him she'd sent an AMS application in the name of the fish.
I miss his sense of humor. He was funny, and it was so easy to make him laugh, too. I mean, we sat back here laughing. I mean, we would analyze the maps, too, and we would forecast the weather, but we had a lot of fun doing it. We really did.
Each member of Harold's weather team recalls a very special gem of wisdom he imparted or a singular weather event, and they all treasure his integrity, his wit, and his smile, and they'll strive to keep the standards of excellence the chief always maintained for himself. Linda Frederick, Texas News 5.
And among those closest to Harold were the three people he chose to be on his staff: David Finfrock, Scott Chesner, and Rebecca Miller. They're all with us tonight to share some of their memories. And all three of you came to Channel 5 with an impressive list of credentials. But to be able to work under Harold really was to be able to work under the master.
Well, you say impressive list of credentials. It's sure maybe meteorologically that's true.
Not television-wise.
Scott and I had no experience at all. Now, Rebecca has had television experience in the past, but when Scott and I came, we were green. We had never never been on the air before. And Harold was more than just a teacher. You know, he was a father figure to us. I think Scott would agree with that.
I'm curious about something. One thing that we wanted to do tonight was to share with people some of what kind of man Harold was. We all saw him do the weather every day. You know him. You worked for him. What kind of boss was Harold? Was he a kind boss? Was he a tough boss? Was he strict? What kind of boss was he?
He was all three wrapped in one. He had his kind and tender moments, but yet he could be as tough as nails. I recall one story back when, this was one of my biggest mistakes, and the time that he really got on my case the most was when we changed our phone system. And I wanted to get the word out to the weather watchers right away that we had a new phone number. Harold was out of town at the time, and I figured, well, we'll just put the new number on the air. And so I did that, and then Harold came back a couple days later, and somebody had called up, one of the crazies out there had called up, and Harold said to the person, how'd you get the number? He said, well, Scott Chesner put it on the air. And boy, he pulled me aside and he said, look, you're supposed to write the weather watchers a letter. Don't just give it out to the public. And he went into a big military thing and he goes, you should have checked with the officer in charge. And I just felt about this high. And
I guess I was the officer in charge.
Yeah, because Harold was David was the officer in charge, and I didn't check with him. But boy, I learned right away. And
but Harold was always very strictly military, even long after his retirement as full colonel. You could ask the folks out here in the studio, they would ask him a question. It wouldn't be a simple yes, it would be affirmative. And Harold never went on vacation, he took leave.
That's right. And now, Rebecca, your tenure here at Channel 5, not quite as long as David or Scott, and your tenure under Harold, much briefer.
Yeah.
Did you find him to be a pretty strict taskmaster as well?
Oh, sometimes he was. I had a real bad habit, and still do, of using a pen for everything. I don't use pencils for anything, and I can't stand to use a pencil. And Harold used to come in and see the weather maps marked with pen, and he would say, you can't use pen on this. And I would tell him, I just don't like pencils. And he says, well, we'll fix that. So he brought me in a mechanical pencil the next day, and he says, okay, here's a mechanical pencil. Now, do you have any nail polish? And I said, what? Is this some kind of weird trade here? And I started looking at my legs. I thought maybe I had a run in my hose. And he says, no, it's not for you, it's for me, and I don't want clear, I want red. And I said, what? And I was laughing. We have an open microphone in the weather office that we used to talk back and forth to WBAP. And the guy on the other end says, I don't know what kind of kinky stuff y'all are talking about in there, but we're recording it. We both started laughing. Well, what it was for was Harold had bought each one of us mechanical pencils, and the nail polish was to mark off who had the red one or who had the peach-colored one.
I've seen that back there. He was almost always right, but weather is very hard to predict, and he would have been the first to have said that. If he ever missed a forecast, what was his reaction? Did you ever see him kind of kick himself or get mad?
Harold never claimed to be perfect, far from it. I think he was a little embarrassed by his legendary status. He never really quite understood it, although he appreciated it.
He was overwhelmed by the people's title that they put on him.
But when he missed a forecast, which happened very infrequently, you would find him going back the next day analyzing those charts to see what went wrong, where did it change that I missed. He was a perfectionist.
There's a sort of funny story about a note that was back on it was a letter frame that was back on the weather wall because he always got a lot of mail. And someone asked him, said, what's the funniest letter that you ever got? And he pointed to this letter which said, Harold, I just shoveled 3 feet of partly cloudy off my front porch this morning. So people let him know.
He had a statement that kind of explained also to kind of cover when the forecast didn't work out right. He said, we don't forecast the weather here, we forecast the conditions that cause the weather. So the conditions to cause the weather were there, it just didn't happen by the will of the Lord or something. So
he never got mad at us either if we missed a forecast.
I don't know whether Harold shared this with you, he may have, but there was a lady who absolutely lived for Harold's weather forecasts on television, and she had a little girl who was about 3 years old, and every time Harold would come on the television, the little girl would be making noise, and the mother would say, it's Harold, hush. And this went on for years and years, and then the little girl grew up to the point where she was really speaking well, and she and her mom were in a store, and here comes Harold down an aisle. The little girl went up to her mother's dress, tugged on it, and said, Mommy, look, it's Harold, hush.
Well, there are a lot of people who were intrigued by Harold's weather, not just that one little girl, and one big group of them was the weather watchers, which Harold started.
That's for sure. I mean, Harold had weather watchers since he started in 1949, as David mentioned, but he most of them would just call up on occasion, but by the early 70s, he really got the program rolling, and the volunteer weather watchers started sending in monthly charts of temperature and rainfall every single day. And we've had many of them, and some of them are still with us, even from back in the early 70s. Perhaps one of the most famous ones is Miss Ponderly Brown of Cleburne, that many of you will remember.
Rainfall is most important in this area because it's a farming area in and around Cleburne.
In April of 1984, we had all of the weather watchers come to Channel 5 for a seminar. That day, among other things, they learned about new developments in technology for forecasting severe weather. And they finally had a chance to fulfill a dream, to meet the Dean of North Texas Weather, our chief, who had handpicked them to be his helpers.
Weather watcher programs continue to grow. We now have over 150 of them, and we know Harold would want them to continue on with us, and we certainly would, so we hope that you weather watchers out there will stay with us, if for Harold's sake, if for nothing else.
A lot of people started being weather watchers just purely out of loyalty to Harold because they liked him so much. David, we tried to pull together a lot of old videotape. We have pretty vast files here.
We sure do.
And one of the things that you wanted to show tonight, we were talking about that Harold was fallible, just like everybody else.
He made mistakes, not as often as most of us, of course. But he, like I said, he never claimed to be perfect. And he always took the weather seriously, but maybe didn't take himself quite so seriously, and admitted it when he did make a mistake. He had a lively sense of humor, and you know, you'll notice earlier this afternoon at the services, the minister frequently mentioned how Harold would go out and check the weather. Well, there was one time when that backfired on him a little bit when he went back just before news time.
If we have that piece of videotape.
You know, I'll have to tell you, I'll just have to confess all.
I'm so glad, Harold.
I left my coat out in the car and went out to get it, and left my keys in the office, couldn't get back in. Y'all had to lock it out. That's what happened. Okay. Well, we get on with the business of hand now anyway.
That's great.
I remember that. I remember that. Dennis Hawley and James Giroux.
Scott was just, Harold was just locked out of the office for half of the show, and finally came in at the last minute and had to fess up. Like
That's right, and we worked with what you might call a skeleton crew some evenings, and there was nobody back there to hear his banging on the door.
Those kinds of things happen sometime. You took a walk through today that we do want to show folks.
Yes, you know, a lot of people often ask us, what's it like to work with Harold on a daily basis? What's it like behind the scenes in the Channel 5 weather office? Well, of course, it's very hard to show you without Harold, but we've tried to recreate the routine that he went through every day and before presenting the forecast on the air. And maybe the viewers can get a feel here for what was really Harold's home away from home. Every day, Harold Taft would come through the back parking lot and then through this door. Seemed like the weather didn't even start until Harold came to work. Here's the weather office door, first one on the left. Boy, there's a lot of history here. We still have this old dusty facsimile machine, and up until a few years ago, that's how we got our maps from this old monster. It uses tubes and weighs about 200 pounds at least. Now our maps are printed by a high-tech computer on computer paper. Actually, the new machines make more noise than the old ones. This is where the day's work began. Harold would tear maps from the printer, post some of them here on the wall, and then take some of the more important ones down and go into the back room for closer examination of the maps. And you got to see this room. It has Harold's touch through and through. Remember these? These are the old paper maps. Everybody remembers those. And actually, these are the very last maps that Harold drew on before we switched to computer graphics back in November of 1982. He was a master at drawing these charts. And people wonder how we do the weather for WBAP radio. Well, here's the microphone. It's hooked directly to Broadcast Hill, so it sounds like we're right there in their studio. I remember Harold would use this old squeaky hinge on the microphone stand for sound effects on the all-night trucking show sometimes. And here's Harold's desk, surrounded by pictures, some of his military service, other of newspaper articles that were done on Harold throughout the years. And there's Harold's Santa Center chart. Boy, that has a lot of history. He has tracked Santa with that chart for 3 generations now. This desk here is where Harold would analyze and reanalyze several weather maps every day. And when David and I helped Harold, sometimes this table would be the battleground for arguments about what the forecast should be for the next day. Of course, the chief usually won most of those arguments. And now for the final stop, the studio, where the infamous weather computer lies. You know, every day, Harold would use the very last minutes and seconds before airtime to draw the most precise and up-to-the-minute weather charts that you'll ever see. And as those of us left behind try to forecast this crazy Texas weather, we know that where Harold is now, it's always clear and warm.
Well, as you can imagine, in Harold's 40-plus years here at Channel 5, he has seen a lot of people come and go. He's seen anchor folks come and go.
A lot of them.
He's seen production folks come and go. He's seen management types come and go, and he withstood the test of time.
Oh, that's right. He usually got along with everybody, but there were a few who rubbed him the wrong way now and then, and usually Harold wound up winning out. There was one time, I guess it was about a decade ago, when one of the former news directors floated the rumor that Harold was going to be leaving. And that's when the first 50,000 cards came in to Harold. It was an amazing thing to see these barrels and barrels of mail come in. And that's when the Harold Taft fan club was started, and you began seeing those bumper stickers on cars that stated it very simply, "I believe Harold."
Management has an amazing propensity now and then to rethink those kinds of things,
don't they? There was one manager, though, the original one, Eamon Carter, the owner of the whole shebang here at Channel 5, who said that he watched Harold and really enjoyed his weathercasts. Like it real good, Carter said, but you mentioned Dallas too damn much.
One of Harold's favorite stories was how Eamon Carter refused to buy lunch in Dallas when he'd go there on business. He'd take a brown bag lunch because he didn't want to contribute to their economy.
But now, obviously,
yes, it sure has.
Obviously, now we know that what's good for Dallas is good for Fort Worth, and we have grown into one huge metropolitan area, which Channel 5 takes care of.
Everybody loves and respects Harold.
That's right.
And there's one thing that won't change, and that is that Harold picked each one of you personally during the search for Rebecca. There were many people who came here and applied for positions. Harold was extremely particular about who would be the next meteorologist hired at Channel 5.
And you can't imagine how that makes me feel. I don't think
that's an honor.
Any job I've ever had has meant as much as this one does to me now.
The standards are high.
Well, we
Thank you all.
owe our careers to him.
That's true.
Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Few things are as useless as an old weather forecast. It's just a piece of paper. That's why films and tapes of Harold Taft at work are so rare. Our Texas News Files now hold more than 5,000 hours of news stories dating back to 1948. Gary Mack is our station historian and has collected some of Harold's legacy, beginning with the oldest existing forecast.
Weather Telefax. Here is your staff meteorologist, Harold Taft.
Good evening, folks. Under clear skies, the present temperature is 82 degrees, and we look for a hot day tomorrow. It was 91 in Fort Worth, 93 in Dallas. Temperatures tomorrow should be up into the middle 90s, downtown areas, some places even warmer than that. Cooler air, however, is pushing down across northwestern Oklahoma, and radar picked up a line of thunderstorms about 30 minutes ago.
By most standards, this is not good television. There should be movement, easily understood pictures, and a friendly face to convey warmth, trust, and sincerity. But Harold believed those things could be a distraction. He wanted viewers to learn about the weather in addition to getting a forecast. The early days were much the same. Harold debuted on Halloween night in 1949. Starting pay was $7 per weather show. Technically, Harold was only contract labor until new owners made him an employee in 1974. Throughout, Harold was totally in charge of how weather was presented.
Forecasts that are issued now, such as 60 miles either side of a line, are a little bit difficult to describe by word of mouth. We can draw pictures on TV, but are there any plans to make this a little more descriptive?
Yes, there are. On occasion, Harold even served as weather reporter, and a few of our promotional announcements were saved. Here's one from 1974.
I've got a very distinct frontal cloud slightly south of west.
When dangerous weather threatens Area 5, you'll know immediately thanks to a weather monitoring system directed by Harold Taft, Channel 5's own weather professional. With 30 years' experience in predicting Texas weather, precision equipment, and 150 weather watchers, you can rely on Harold Taft to keep you up to date on any weather changes. To complement our own weather facilities, Tarrant County Civil Defense has designated Channel 5 as an outlet for sky-worn observations during periods of severe weather in Area 5.
All stations stand by if they do not have have a tornado inside. All stations stand by.
So when violent weather comes to Area 5, you'll want to stay with the professionals, people trained to watch the fast-changing Texas weather and to let you know how it affects your life in Area 5.
This is Harold Taft in the weather station at Channel 5.
Color radar and computerization did away with Harold's hand-drawn maps. But once there was a massive power failure at our building,
And now my fingernails are green again.
and the weather was done outside with the help of portable generators. Other mishaps plague live television. They are called bloopers. And yes, we keep the funny ones.
I haven't the vaguest idea what that is. Not the vaguest idea in this world what that is. But it must be. It's what it was this morning. But it warmed this afternoon. Thank you. It warmed this afternoon to... well, thank you. You can't see it, but it's 47 degrees.
Harold often played his cornet with the Lions Club Band of Fort Worth at Dallas Cowboys games. He gave almost all of his adult life to Channel 5 and all our North Texas viewers. It should be noted for the record books, as Harold would say, that he died on the very day of this station's 43rd anniversary of our first broadcast. So long, Chief. Gary Mack, Texas News 5.
You know, as David mentioned earlier, Harold used to hand draw all of his maps.
And still like to, really.
He did. He liked to have that chance every now and then when the computer, for whatever reason, would go on the fritz. And Harold, a veteran of 2 wars, used to say, I have done weather briefings in the middle of minefields, on the back of pickups in war zones, but nothing will, and forgive me, but he would say, nothing gives me gas like this computer does. And you saw an example of why that happened on that little reel.
And then he would say, now come on guys, get that up there, whatever it is that he was looking for at that particular point.
Coaxing the machine. Now, we've talked about Harold, the professional meteorologist. We've talked about Harold, the mentor. Harold was also an author. He and Ron Godbey penned this book, Texas Weather, back in the early 70s. It's long been out of print, but it was so popular back then they couldn't keep copies of it on hand.
I remember when I first came to this station, there were several copies of it in the lobby. It was my first introduction, really, to Channel 5, was Harold Taft's Weather. Doug Adams, the station's general manager, was a member of our news staff when he and Harold went chasing a hurricane, and that must have been quite an adventure. Doug, did you find it?
It was. We did, in fact. Being in the middle of a hurricane is always an adventure, but being there with the world's greatest weatherman is really something that's probably unparalleled. In fact, the most interesting thing about it to me was that he told me, as we were in the middle of this, that despite having done his job for over 30 years at that time, he'd never actually written a news story. So we went through the experience of writing a script, and he was as nervous as a cub reporter in writing and recording his very first news story and putting it on tape and putting it on the air. And that was a thrilling experience. Then we found the hurricane, and it came into Corpus Christi, and we went right after it passed through. We were driving down one of the main streets. We were the only idiots out, actually.
Now, did you find it, or did it find you?
Actually, we were trying to move away from it, but it found us, as that sometimes happened. We were on a street in Corpus Christi. Nobody else was around. I was driving, and suddenly Harold grabbed my arm and said, stop. And when Harold says stop like that, you stop. And he said, that is a tornado. And it was, and we went right back up in the clouds. So I have probably the unique experience in the world of having Harold tell somebody in person that that is a tornado right in front of him.
And you went on quickly, I assume.
We did.
I'm kind of curious about something. We're talking about what kind of man Harold is. You have been Harold's boss. What kind of employee was Harold? Did he come up to your office often with comments and suggestions on things, or did he stay out of matters? Did he have opinions on station matters, how things should be done?
Harold had remarkably accurate opinions, which won't surprise those of you who worked with you. And he didn't object to sharing them at all, but he did it always in an ideal employee kind of way. And he came up and he would kind of draw me aside and say, you know, I think this person over here is doing a great job, and this guy over here is maybe, you know, but they were always right on target,
He had a lot of insight, and in a day when we do have a lot of research and things like that, Harold would make observations. You'd be sitting out on the set, and there would be a news story or something like that. He'd make an observation, and it would hit home. It was, you knew, it was exactly what someone was probably thinking, which I think is one of the reasons that people liked him so much.
And sometimes, you know, he actually gave us directions to follow to push a news story forward. One word, I mean, one line. He might say, here's what you guys need to do. During a 6 o'clock news, he'd sit and listen to a story and say, here's what you need to do for 10. And it was invariably a novel approach that nobody else had thought of.
One of the other things that's kind of funny as an anchor person is that if you made a mistake on the weather toss or something, if you said, oh, it's kind of nice day outside, right? No, not really. And he told you very quickly that it wasn't.
Or define nice. He was an amazing man.
You also would have gotten, Doug, a lot of letters, I'm sure, about Harold, about him as a person over the years. What kinds of things did people say in those letters? What kinds of comments did you get about Harold? What did people like?
I guess the variety of comments would, I guess, speak to the reason we're here tonight and why so many people care and why so many people are with us in observing and caring about him tonight, because the body of comments really are the kind of things that you would say about your closest friends. Sometimes it's just chit-chat, but certainly all of the letters would talk about Harold in the same way that you'd talk about a close friend, and they would be a lot of, you guys in the weather office know this, because they would be, well, you know, I really want to tell you that I appreciate Harold because he gave me this bit of information which made my ball game go better, that kind of thing. They were the important day-to-day things that were the essence of that personal relationship that Harold had with everybody through the television camera, that very rare thing that made him a phenomenon, and he would hate the word, but a superstar.
And so many people will miss him so very much because of that exact thing. Everywhere I have been for the last, ever since he got sick, really, everywhere I would go, someone would say to me, how is Harold? How's he doing now? People, just an enormous amount of concern for him. And
he was such an inspiration to so many sick people out there, and that is a responsibility that Harold, during his sickness, took very, very seriously. When Harold, for whatever reason, wasn't on the news, the phone would ring off the hook. And like I say, it was a responsibility that he took so very seriously. And I almost envisioned Harold as part of his daily routine. We saw Scott do a walkthrough in the Weather Center and kind of tell us what Harold did here at the station every day. I sort of envisioned Harold at home during his battle with cancer, straightening his tie just before he left the house, looking in the mirror and saying to himself, cancer is a terrible thing. But you know something, if you have to have cancer, I need to go out and show people how to handle it. And he did.
Well, every couple of days when he was out for an extended period of time, and this would be true until a week ago, he would call me and say, Doug, I'm sorry, I really thought I was going to be in today, but I can't do it. He wanted to be here so badly.
It was his therapy.
Right.
And I want to add one quick thing to that before we move on, and that is that I don't know if someone has said this already or not, but people may not realize he wanted to be here very badly, so much that between sometimes the 5 and the 6 o'clock programs, when Harold was very sick, when he was enduring chemotherapy, which was extremely difficult, Harold would go into the weather office, and Harold would lie down on the floor in there or on a sofa in there, and he would be able to get up just to come back in and do his weather forecast. And then he would go lie down again. That's how much it meant to him.
No matter how much he complained, I mean, no matter how much pain he was in, he never complained. Nope. He never did.
Nope.
All right.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for the insight, Doug.
We'll miss him.
Harold made history on Channel 5, but thousands more knew him because of WBAP radio. His reports were often heard all the way to Canada. Out-of-state listeners say Harold was more accurate than their local meteorologist, and that's saying something. Texas News 5's Deborah Ferguson now takes a look at Harold, the radio personality.
To return home, he died in his own bed last night at 10:30.
The death of Harold Taft was at the top of Joe Halstead's Saturday morning newscast. WBAP radio was Harold's other home. Although he made history with Channel 5, thousands more knew Harold from his reports on WBAP.
A man called me from Lafayette, Louisiana, who works with a helicopter offshore crew, a fleet of helicopters. And he said before he went into his weather briefing every morning with his pilots, the last thing he did was listen to Harold Taft on the radio on WBAP to know what type of weather was going on before he went in to make his notes about where his men were flying that day.
In 1969, the midnight cowboy Bill Mack got up the nerve to ask Harold to be part of his all-night show.
I knew I was meeting a legend when I first met him. He'd already been here 20 years when I started, but I think probably, if I look back, I can't think of a more important moment, and certainly no more important person in my professional career than my association with the man I referred to and gave the title, the world's greatest weatherman.
Thousands of truckers across the country tuned in to Bill and Harold.
He'd give the late night road conditions and everything, and he would be real close, you know. You knew what to expect whenever Harold gave the weather on it. If he told you, you know, to look out for heavy rains, you better look out for heavy rains.
And for those in rural areas, Harold was a guiding force.
During the winter times, we'd watch snow if it's going to get below freezing or not, because my dad runs the public market here in Weatherford, and if it's going to get freezing, we'd have to move everything inside it.
All in memorial to Harold Taft. That's all coming your way between now and noon today.
For 3 hours Monday, Harold's radio family gathered for their best Harold stories.
I came to work here in '72, and I wanted to strike up a conversation with Mr. Taft.
Yes.
And his forecast was a tad off the day before. Well, everyone makes fun of the weatherman, so you kind of missed it, didn't you, Harold? Weather changed. If you'll check your TV when I do it tonight, you'll see how it changed.
Don Harris remembers the time Harold and wife Pat were late for a fundraiser.
Oh, Harold says, you know, beautiful day, weather's perfect, no air conditioner for Harold. Had to drive with the windows down. His notes blew out the window.
On the radio, Harold was an entertainer with his own sound effects.
The world's greatest weatherman, bar none. And here he is on a beautiful night, Mr. Harold Taft.
See if you can help me down off this saddle, will you, Bill?
So it's time to not say goodbye, but just so long for a while, Harold. Have a good flight home.
Deborah Ferguson, Texas News 5.
Well, as you saw, Bill Mack introduced Harold to the nation on his all-night trucking show. And Bill, you and Harold had an awful lot of fun times together over the years.
We had great times. Great times. There were many nights when it was just Harold and me, over around 22 years. And I often wondered what's it going to be like when Harold's not there, and I found out a couple of nights ago.
A little bit of a lonesome spot.
A lonesome spot.
I want to ask you, we all know that you named him the world's greatest weatherman, but why? What happened? How did it come about?
It was a composite of reasons. Number one, I knew Harold. I'd watched him before I came to WBAP. I loved his weather. And he made me think of an old guitar picker friend of mine, so I liked to watch him because he made me think. But after I watched his weather and became accustomed to him as a weatherman, then when I came with WBAP, I'd pick up the telephones and I would hear truckers from up in Minneapolis or down in Florida. They'd say, we have meteorologists here, but what's Harold say about the weather? But he had that thing that so many broadcasters wish for, hope for, practice to have. He had a one-on-one. When he was on television or on radio, when he spoke, you felt like he was talking to you personally. And so I put it together, and I said, well, he's the greatest, the world's greatest weatherman. It was a composite of many, many reasons. His talent, his one-on-one, his great ability to just associate. And he was never wrong on the weather. Oh, maybe a few times, but I never told him. There's a funny story.
Neither did we.
He asked me to tell that story one time. I was going to go out and play golf, and he had forecast rain. And it didn't rain, or had not rained. It was supposed to rain the next day where I couldn't play golf. This is 2 o'clock in the morning, so he came in my radio show, and I said, Harold, I noticed it hadn't rained. And so help me, it wasn't 10 seconds, we had a power failure in WBAP, and the lights went off for a split second. He said, "It will." And when I went to my car the next morning, it was raining.
If I know Harold, he smiled a little bit when he said that, too.
I always used to joke that Harold was one of the few people, the only person I knew, who had a direct line to God, and he picked it up on a regular basis.
He did have.
Thank you for coming in tonight.
Had one memory of Harold that somebody asked me on the newspapers the other day, "What is your fondest memory?" I said, "It's a perfect love story." The last time I saw Harold in the hospital, he said, I want you to thank the people for their prayers, their good thoughts, their friendship. And I remember every morning I had this intercom system where I could hear what was happening in the weather room, and I would hear him almost every morning when he would go home. He would pick up the telephone and call Patty and say, "I'm on my way home, and I love you." It was a love story. Harold Taft was a love story between his listeners and all of us.
It's a wonderful insight into Harold Taft.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Bill.
Harold Taft was first and foremost a scientist. His colleagues at the National Weather Service revered him as a meteorologist. But Harold was also an American's American, a fiercely patriotic man. His love of his country, and he served it proudly during 2 wars. Texas News 5 Chief Correspondent Mike Snyder recounts the proud military heritage that earned Harold the title Colonel.
Channel 5 was the first station in the Southwest to set up a weather center, such as you see here, and to employ professional meteorologists to analyze and forecast the weather.
While Harold was proud of his title as Chief Meteorologist for Channel 5, he was most proud of a title that had absolutely nothing to do with television. Many of us called him Colonel, a title he earned as the weather commander for the Texas Air National Guard.
When I first came to the Texas Air National Guard, well, the first thing you see when you walk in our unit is a photograph up there. I can tell you right now, that's Harold Taft. He's the one who has been our role model here in our unit, the 181st Weather Flight.
1963, Harold became the commander of the 181st Weather Flight of the Texas Air National Guard. While he spent nights at Channel 5, he spent days and weekends at Hensley Field, Dallas, keeping Guard pilots out of harm's way.
He was one of those individuals that was a no-nonsense commander.
Colonel Bert Evans is now the 181st Weather Commander, and back in 1969 got his start under Harold as a part-timer at Channel 5 before joining the Guard.
The man was 100% what he was. Integrity stood above all other things. In other words, if you were listening to Harold Taft and you were talking weather, because that's what you'd probably be talking about, you knew you were getting the best that there was available.
The largest combat fleet ever assembled sped across the channel. Some 4,000 ships of all varieties moved resolutely on the coast of occupied France.
A reputation he gained 47 years ago when he served as the North Atlantic meteorologist for General Dwight D. Eisenhower on D-Day. The general needed rotten, nasty weather on that June 6, 1944, to hide his invasion force headed for the coast of Normandy to face off with Adolf Hitler. Well, Harold found the bad weather, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Knowing that he did those things, and he was very, very good at it, one of the very best, then it's something that one tries to emulate, I guess.
After World War II, Harold joined the newly created U.S. Air Force and was assigned to briefing B-36 and B-24 pilots for the 7th Bomb Wing at Carswell Air Force Base. In 1949, Harold joined the reserves and within months took off with the Texas Air National Guard on active duty in Korea, where his weather report steered the way for fighter pilots, making the conversion from P-51 Mustangs and entering the jet age in F-80s.
We are more than happy to dedicate this Veterans Day to the women in uniform.
Harold wore his uniform proudly until the end. He loved the military brethren as much as they loved him. And no more proof is needed than the impression he left on those he commanded.
I feel like here's someone I've looked up to and admired, and I guess I just kind of felt like he's going to be here forever. We're going to miss him big time.
Mike Snyder, Texas News 5.
You know, another aspect of Harold's life was his tireless work in charities. And Bobby Wygant spent many a year doing telethons with Harold, and when he missed this last telethon, Bobby, I know it hurt him so deeply because he wanted to be there.
Yes, and remember, he came to the telethon meeting on Saturday, and he had his feeding machine, as he called it, his life support system. And I said to him, Harold, is this breakfast or brunch, you know, with the tubes and all the food, the liquid going through? And he said, I'm having ham and eggs this morning.
What do you remember about, like, the first time you worked with Harold on a telethon?
Well, I remember that prior to that, for 2 or 3 years, they had brought in people from Hollywood. And then they asked Harold and me to MC the telethon. And so after we enthusiastically said yes, then we got off by ourselves and we said, what the heck have we gotten ourselves into? And Harold said, well, at least we'll be able to pronounce the names of the streets correctly.
You know, one of the most lasting memories I have of Harold was during a telethon, a pre-telethon meeting with the folks from the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Not this year, but the year prior. And it was when Harold was in the midst of his chemotherapy. And he had just had a chemo treatment the day before, and he came up to a Saturday meeting, and he walked in the door, and I was compelled to get up and I mean, that's what I thought. I didn't do it, but I thought, my gosh, I need to get up and help Harold in the door. And the poster child walked right up to Harold. They met. Harold lifted her up with every ounce of strength he had and carried her over to a chair and hugged her and loved her up. Harold. And he just barely had enough strength to walk.
You said that one time Harold did mention retirement, those words.
Yes, he did. He said, I'm not telling anybody, Bobby, but he said, when I'm 70, I'm going to retire. And I just listened. I said, He said, Patty and I have things we want to do, go to the coast. And then in my mind, I was saying, Harold, that means you'll work only 8 hours instead of 18 a day.
And he did. Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby. Well, Harold Taft was an outdoorsman, but he wasn't a fisherman. So when outdoor editor Bill Tippett took him on a fishing trip, he figured he could teach the old man a few things. Instead, Harold wound up teaching him when fish are easy to catch and why.
Just over a year ago last July, following major surgery for his cancer, Harold Taft, along with his granddaughter Tiffany, went fishing with us on Lake Tawakoni. Harold was an avid duck hunter, but he had reservations about fishing.
Well, now that's true. That's true. I can sit in a duck blind all day and not fire a shot and not be unhappy, but to go out and fish and sit there all day, that is discouraging.
This day, a day that Harold only got 3 hours of sleep after doing weather forecast on the Texas News and WBAP radio to the wee hours of the morning, was a special one. Mesquite fishing guide Rex Bridges found the fish for Harold and Tiffany.
Swing him over into the boat.
Oh, man. Just about to get the chief there. Oh, that is a big one. That's about...
We're definitely having fish.
That one's going to go to the tournament. This fishing trip provided the necessary ingredients.
Well, it's kind of quiet and relaxing and doesn't require a whole lot of mental agility, and I think that's relaxing. Plus, just getting out in the open air and the sunshine and the fresh air has to be good. Has to be good.
Harold's popularity was immense. Even on the lake, boats quickly found out Harold was there fishing. The response from viewers on his illness surprised him.
It's a very humbling experience, there's no question about it. To think that many people would take the time to go get a card and write and mail it, and it's really quite an experience.
To those of us who knew him professionally, Harold was always a teacher, a scientist. On the lake, he took the time to explain how barometric pressure fluctuates.
Well, it fluctuates during the day considerably. From before noon until early in the evening, the barometer is falling, and falling rather rapidly in the late afternoon. Now, early in the morning, just before daybreak, it's rising. Now, there's some minor fluctuations in it, but those are the major ones. In other words, the cooler the air temperature, the higher the barometric pressure. The hotter the air temperature, the lower the barometric pressure. So when we go from low temperature in the morning to hot temperature in the afternoon, your barometer is falling. And it falls quite a bit, especially in these hot summer days.
Fishermen and hunters will miss Harold and his forecast, but above all, will miss the twinkle in his eyes and his ever-present smile. Bill Tippett, Texas News 5.
You know, when you do the 6 and the 10 o'clock news here at Channel 5 or anywhere else, it involves many a late night, and our sports director, Scott Murray, spent many a late evening with Harold here.
Yeah, we really did, and I didn't realize, you know, you see him fishing there with Tip, but he used to get down to the coast, down to Galveston and Corpus Christi area to his condo and fish a lot. Every time he'd take some time off during the summer months, and it was so great to listen to him talk about what was on BAP. Hey, did you hear that play by the Mavericks? Or, you know, the Rangers shouldn't do this. I never forget when Jimmy Sundberg was let go by the Rangers. He had a fit.
He knew a lot about sports.
He really did.
He would sit down here and he would talk about this or that team, that kind of thing. You also did a lot of charity work together, of course.
We did. We would do a lot of functions together. I would end up being the MC, and he was always the one that was being honored out there. He did so many great things for so many great people. You know, he was a great predictor of weather, but he was a great predictor of life. And I can't tell you how many times I went to him for advice, and he would say, try this. And I'd try it, and invariably, he was always right.
You know something, I'm in that same boat. Harold gave me some of the best advice in my life.
Me also. I would go back into the weather office and ask him whether it was maybe a personal problem or maybe something that had to do with your career, or if it were an important thing. You know, there are probably people in your life whose opinions you really value. I didn't know that until just now, that you did the same thing.
Almost like a second father.
We all sought him out as a grandfather or a father figure, because he was so knowledgeable about so many things, and as you say, Scott, so much of it just about life in general.
And he was so funny too. I love to tell the story that I've shared with Jane over the years about every time that he would go along with his weather forecast. I always remember this about Harold, and we'd be in here at 10:30, 11 o'clock after everybody had left, and I'd say, Harold, you went over again tonight. You know, I only got a minute and a half for sports, and you took 14 minutes to tell him it's going to rain or shine tomorrow. And he'd burst out laughing, and he'd put his hand here, and he said, Scott, my friend, the pay's the same. I can see him doing that so many times, but he was, and I burst out laughing. I couldn't, you know, how could you get mad at a man that gave you so much direction, was so, he was a trusted friend for so many people.
And Harold was such a deeply religious man. I'll bet every one of us at one time or another has said, Harold, have a great weekend. Harold, see you tomorrow. And invariably the response would be, Lord willing, and if the creek don't rise.
That's for sure.
Every Friday afternoon or every Friday night when I left, that's exactly what Harold would say.
He was so spiritual. I think that Harold felt that the best way to stand up to life's adversity was right after you'd gotten up off your knees from praying. And that's a philosophy that he adhered to his entire life.
Special man. We'll miss him.
We will, greatly. Thanks, Scott.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in, Scott.
We were thinking about things that we wanted to say tonight. We were trying to come up with things we wanted to share with people about Harold. And there's one thing that sticks in my mind about the past few months especially. I would come in the afternoons and during this intense chemotherapy, and we'd talk about his illness, and neither one of us could say, you're going to be fine, because we knew that that really wasn't the case. But when we would talk, he would always say to me, Jane, all any of us has is right now, today. And so Harold reminded me to live each day fully and completely and enjoy a day of precious life, just as he did.
I remember the last time I saw Harold, he was able to just barely speak. And I said, I don't want you to talk. You just sit there and listen. I'm just here to talk to you. It was at home. He was in bed Wednesday before he died. And I said, I just want to be with you. And we chatted for a while, and I got up and left, and I said, God bless you, and goodbye, my friend. And I saw a little rustle from underneath the covers, and his hand, he could barely lift it, and waved goodbye. God bless him.
We will miss him greatly.
And we close tonight with Harold's favorite verse of Scripture. It is John 14, verse 2. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And we trust that Harold has found his mansion.
Harold Taft lived and died with dignity and with remarkable courage. We will all miss him. Good night.
Good night.
The weather, what's coming tonight? That cold wind blowing has a little more bite. The clouds are thicker and something ain't right. Texas lost someone she loved. It looks like the future is dreary and gray. The silver-lined clouds are all drifting away, 'cause Harold's not giving the weather today. Texas lost someone she loved. You feel like you've known him since you don't know when. He's checked out the weather and he's right again. You never met him, but he's your best friend. Texas lost someone she loved. Have you heard the weather, what's coming tonight? That cold wind blowing has warmed up a mite. He's still doing weather, he's just out of sight. Texas lost someone she loved. Texas lost someone she loved.